Yum, yum. It's time for a tasty and refreshing snack.
You know who I can do without? I can do without the people in the video store.
Which ones?
All of them. They never rent quality flicks. They always pick the most intellectually devoid movie on the racks.
And now, on with the show.
Deranged killers have the strangest of hobbies.
Sorry, I gotta go off and murder someone.
Whether it's sailing
I want off this boat.
or a spot of gardening,
He gardens their underwater graves.
they have dynamic vision
Okay, I'll drown the girl.
You know, this is some sick stuff.
and an artistic approach.
Which one of you wants to die? There's a little bit of Stanley in everybody.
Judd Nelson stars in Cabin by the Lake on 2 consecutive Thursdays on Zone Thriller.
Hey guys, what's going on? You are listening to ThisWeekInGeek.net's Loose Cannon, the show where we talk about old movies, new, old, sometimes forgotten, sometimes not, but usually you probably don't know necessarily a whole lot about them. This is the show where I join my friends around the Twig video store from friends near and far, though one is from Michigan, one is from Ohio, one is from just down the street. In this episode of the show, I bring in Twig video store employee manager, the guy who knows way more than me, from the host of Do You Even Movie, the podcast. I'm joined with
David Denoyer.
So yes, guys, we are going to be talking about a pair of movies tonight, which I'm not going to lie, took me a long time to get through. And not because they're long or boring, but because I'm like, I have to restart this again. I forget everything that has happened. Although it does have a Transformers connection, so I'm okay with that. Oh boy.
I'm shocked. I'm just shocked that you say it took you a while to get through, because these are TV movies that are barely 90 minutes. Barely.
Okay, so to give folks a little bit of context, so we're going to be talking about the USA Networks. They did a pair of movies in the early 2000s called Cabin by the Lake, which some of you may have heard of. I know I sure as hell didn't.
Mm-hmm.
But as Dave just said, they're 90 minutes. I've seen each of these movies 3 times, not because I enjoy them, because holy shit do I not, but because I'm like, will something goddamn happen? I hate this. She's kind of cute.
God.
Wait a second. You're from Final Fantasy. The fuck? So yeah, there are video game connections in these movies. And
which is more than I know. Which is more than I know, because I have an appreciation for these films for a whole nother level, which we'll get into.
Yeah, so David suggested we watch these movies. They're called Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake. And I have never heard of these. And when me and Dave began kind of chatting up last year, and he started becoming a regular Twig contributor, I said, I want you and Enrique, his co-host on Do You Even Movie, to show me things I've never seen before. Challenge me in the ways of both good, bad, and just stuff I've never seen. Because Alex and Aaron, when it comes to sci-fi, those guys can show me the moon and beyond. I'm so thrilled. If I want to learn hard science, I talk to Aaron. If I want to learn weird and bizarre, I talk to Alex. I want to learn horror movies and everything else, I talk to you two. So my cinematic palette has expanded since last summer, and television movies are a bit of a lost art, I find, because
Absolutely.
you don't see them get made very much anymore, if at all. And I remember in the era of the TV movie that I grew up in, I was the movie of the week on CBS or ABC. USA Network was still fairly alien to me. I used to watch the USA cartoon stuff on Sunday mornings, USA's Cartoon Express, which I'm sure we'll talk about on this show at some point. And I didn't know they made movies, although I was very familiar with their horror hosting stuff they would run on USA Up All Night, which I'm pretty sure me, Enrique, and Aaron talked about at some point late last year. And finding out about this, I was like, okay, that's interesting. And while I was watching these movies, my wife watched both of them with me because, like I said, it took me a couple times to watch these. And she says, this reminds me a lot of episodes of Criminal Minds. And
I could see that.
And it wouldn't surprise me if Criminal Minds has done an episode like this or not. I don't know. I was kind of hoping, Dave, you might have some kind of an insight into this. It wouldn't be surprised me if like one of the writers went on to work on those shows. But some of the things that really caught my attention is the lead actress in the first one, Hetty Burris. Mm-hmm. That's the voice of Yuna from Final Fantasy, and she's pretty much been that voice for the entire history of that character since Final Fantasy X, kind of moving forward. So I'm like, all right, that's cool. And with Judd Nelson, aka Hot Rod from 1986's Transformers the movie, and Bender from
the Breakfast Club. I mean, Judd Nelson is solely the reason that I've watched these movies. Not. I mean, I'll get into the specific reasoning of how these fell into my lap. But I have a affection for Judd Nelson. I love his charisma. I love his delivery. I love his general. He can go one way of being, a complete asshole to being a caring individual. Like, he has that spectrum of acting that I really appreciate. So his presentation in these films are probably the number one reason I love these movies.
I mean, when I watched it, I felt like in the first movie, he was a little sleepy is the only way I can really describe it. But I found he really came to life in the second one. Like that's the Judd Nelson I know. And these movies, they're not bad necessarily. I found my experience with them, it felt like I was watching a really high production level episode of Criminal Minds or CSI or something like that. But maybe it's because I'm very jaded towards that particular style of writing. And I know you have a lot of insight into this. So this is going to be a lot of you telling me facts and interesting figures about this movie. But I don't know. Like, I wanted to experience it and love it as much as you did, but I didn't.
And that's fine.
But I'm always willing to know more about it because I think the idea is remarkably interesting. And I was surprised I got a sequel out of this because the character is interesting in the regards that, he's not like, he's a psycho through and through, but he's a charming psycho. So to speak.
I mean that's a good. So okay, let's get into Cabin by the Lake from 2000 to start this off in regards to how this movie fell into my lap. So not to make you feel old, but in 2000 I was 8 years old.
Shut the fuck up, Dave.
I was 8 years old. I'm not 100% sure if this was towards the premiere of the film, because as Birdman said, this is a premiere on USA Network. USA Network was a TV station that brought us such titles in the US as The Dead Zone. The series was a regular contender for Walker, Texas Ranger reruns on afternoons when I would get home from school usually. But I saw this movie solely because my mother was watching it one day when I had either come in from the house from playing outside, gotten home, etc. I'm not 100% sure. But anyway, I had come home and my mom was watching this movie on either Sci-Fi Lifetime or USA. It was probably USA, to be honest. And I was, I came in and I was like, what you watching? And she was like, oh, Cabin by the Lake. And I had the liberty of both catching Breakfast Club on TV, but that was one of the movies that my parents would let me watch because we had a VHS of it. So I was familiar with Judd Nelson as playing Bender, John Bender, the asshole bully with heart in Breakfast Club. One of my favorite movies to this day. And probably because of the fact that Judd Nelson steals that movie. And if you say otherwise, I'll punch you. But no, so I sit down and I watch this and I'm seeing Judd Nelson play this character. So to give you perspective on Cabin by the Lake, it's a movie from 2000, a TV film. The IMDb synopsis says a screenwriter who lives in a cabin by the lake near Los Angeles drowns young women, then goes back to visit their bodies and do their laundry. What it fails to mention is he is a screenwriter. He's an established screenwriter. and his agent the entire time is harboring him on changes to make and, further developments in the script. So he has to kill girls more and more to keep his script going so he can write it. So Cabin by the Lake is the story of a screenwriter that is killing women on this lake while these people know him because he's a regular contributor to the special effects department that's also on the lake. He knows the sheriff of the lake and is generally known on the area as kind of being a hermit. So he is the guy that you would last suspect, which is always the guys that we know if we watch True Crime and Read True Crime, the ones that are always the ones doing it. So Cabin by the Lake was a movie that I immediately grasped onto because I came home from school or came inside or whatever, and I watched it with my mom, and I'm watching Judd Nelson play this psychopath that is holding these women in his little cabin and has a soundproof room where he chains them, brings them food, sandwiches, or brings them food, clothes, and over the time period, drowns them one by one. What makes this unique is he drowns them in a way of tying an anchor to them, sinking them to the bottom of this lake, and then he positions them in what he calls his garden of flesh, which is the display of all these bodies that he has collected over the years, whatever it is, of doing this. And so you get this insight into Judd Nelson, who is a stand-up looking guy, and the first reveal you get is that he's talking to his agent on the phone, and she's like, well, why does he drown them? We need to have more pages, like send me more of the screenplay. And he ends the conversation with, okay, I'll drown the girl. And then we see that he literally has a girl in the bottom of his cabin that he's holding, that he has been holding for an undetermined amount of time, that he is next going to drown and add to his garden of flesh. So the movie is essentially Stanley Caldwell is Judd Nelson's character, drowning these women to further his screenplay so that he can send it off to his agent that sends it off to the director, and they're going to make a movie of this. I thought that was a really unique concept, as dull as it might be in regards to the creativity sense. I thought it was pretty original and funny, in my opinion.
Yeah, I like the idea behind this, and I really think it actually has some legs, and I'm actually kind of surprised nobody has thought of this sooner. Actually. And like I said, the idea seems like something I'd see on CSI or Criminal Minds or any of those 1,000 shows you see on CBS or something. And I'm thinking, all right, fascinating idea. What do you do with it? Yeah. So it's so strange though when he creates this garden of flesh. It's weird. I don't know how else to describe it. It's so weird that he wants to do this.
It absolutely is. And I think the originality of it in regards to the way that he creates this. So the reason that I love this movie is because I'm a big fan of Judd Nelson. I've seen a lot of his movies. He's done a lot of TV films. He's done a lot of movies that people don't even know about, From the Hip, Blue City. I mean, I could go on and on with his filmography. But basically, what I love about Cabin by the Lake is it is a time capsule of TV films when they were a big deal still. And what I mean by that is I'm a big fan of TV movies solely because I grew up in an age where they were still a really big thing, where we've kind of completely transitioned out of them at this point because you have Netflix and Paramount and Peacock, and all of them have original movies now. I mean, for example, Peacock just did Monk's Last Case, which is literally a final conclusion to the Monk TV series that started on USA. And Peacock has that exclusively, a final movie that reunites the cast and has a new case and all this stuff. TV movies were a big deal for me because I was able to see them a lot more because I grew up in, the 90s, 2000s and whatnot, when Sci-Fi would show Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake, or Lifetime, for example, would show Cabin by the Lake and its other predecessor. TV movies for me were a time capsule of a time that we no longer have, unfortunately. And the only way we can get them is, by the graces of Amazon Prime showing them, or them being available on YouTube, which is luckily where you can find Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake at the time of this recording in the US. They are both available on YouTube from a poster that I will not name, but has put up both of them in their entirety. Cabin by the Lake is the exact TV movie that you would expect, where you have a big star and then you really don't have any other big names that I could think of. I mean, if I'm wrong, Birdman, let me know, but Judd Nelson is the driving force.
Oh yeah, for sure. The guy who plays Boone, who's the lead cop in this, I think he becomes the lead character in that TV show Bull or something.
Oh, maybe he does. That wouldn't surprise. Yeah, Michael Weatherly. Yeah, that wouldn't surprise me. Let me double check real quick.
I think the closest thing we get to the TV movies now is
Bull, 152 episodes, NCIS. He's on NCIS. So yeah, I mean, you do have names, but to give you example for Michael Weatherly, Cabin by the Lake happens in 2000. Before that, he had series that had 6 episodes. Oh, he was on Loving in 92. So there are names in this, but Nelson is the driving force of this movie, which was the thing that happened, especially with Lifetime and whatnot in those days.
Yeah, and I guess the modern equivalent is the stuff you see on Disney Plus or Peacock, although the people who put real money into their productions now is like Apple Plus and Netflix to varying degrees of quality. Like sometimes you get some amazing made for Netflix movies like Hitman's Bodyguard, but then you get crap like, say, I don't know, the Netflix adaptation of Death Note, which we should that just gave me an idea to talk about with Ken, because he loves anime, and that's mostly the things we do in Loose Cannon. But say, let's do all the Netflix anime adaptations. But anyway,
that's a painful episode, but I also am not against it.
I will have to drag you two into this. But yeah, it's like, I think the thing that works for Cabin by the Lake, if it does anything right, it's pacing. Again, television movies, you have to work in commercial breaks, so to speak. They're not too obvious here for cuts. Everybody's fairly likable. The actors, I don't know, there's not really a bad performance in this. Like I said, the only major complaint I have about Cabin by the Lake, the first one anyway, is that Judd Nelson seems rather subdued, not disinterested, because that's a very distinct line I draw. Like, you can tell when an actor's phoning something in. This one, I think the director maybe, it wouldn't surprise me if he was given bad direction in the regards, like, can you be really low key?
Po Chi Long is the director of Cabin by the Lake, and his filmography has a lot of productions in it that I am not familiar with, but around 85 is where you can actually 84 is where you can kind of see him start to take off. He does a film called Hong Kong, 1941, Bu Hong Yang in 85. So, like, he's got a lot of productions that are foreign productions. This was probably his biggest production to date of 2000. He had a movie in 98 called Immortality. He does Cabin by the Lake in 2000, The Darkling in 2000, which is also a TV film, TV series Night Visions in 2001, Return to Cabin by the Lake in 2001, Wolf Lake 2001. So he was probably a director that they could A, easily get, and B, they liked his body of work before. Because that's what you find with a lot of these TV productions is they go for people where they've seen the body of work. And also, a TV movie in regards to production back in this era was a big deal, but also it was easy to assign people to it with their body of work previously that you could kind of count on them. I mean, he does Out of Reach in 2004, the Steven Seagal direct-to-DVD movie, that, you know, that gives you a perspective on where this man is in his career. David Stevens is the writer of this, and he goes on to do this and Return to Cabin by the Lake. So, I mean, you have a production here that they really liked the script. They really knew that they could do something with it. Once they had the star power of Judd Nelson, full steam ahead. So Cabin by the Lake is that essential Lifetime feel movie. Lifetime Movie Network was a cauldron of these type of movies in the 90s and 2000s. You know, Mother May I Sleep with Danger, Mother, Murderer, Lover, you know, all those titles that you know of. I mean, I still watch Lifetime to this day. Literally, Allie and I watched Lifetime a couple nights ago, and we watched a movie called Psycho Granny, which stars Robin Riker, who is the head scientist in the 1980 film Alligator, playing a psycho granny that kills people because she wants to have the perfect family. These synopses are super easy to create and then shoot, but you have to have names with them. You have to have people that can deliver the content. The reason that I love Cabin by the Lake so much is because, like I said, it's both a time capsule of that time in TV movies, but also this is generally, in my opinion, a pretty solid story because you have Stanley that is, drowning these women to get the screenplay written. So then when he meets the character that is played by Hetty Burris, Mallory, who he goes to a movie theater and she is a cute worker behind the concession counter, but she says something along the lines of water. God damn it, I have the line here. Give me a second. It's something along the lines of, let's see. It's not the water that's scary, or it's something. I can't remember the exact line, but she immediately interests Stanley because he's like, oh, somebody that's afraid of water, I can work with this. So, after she gets off her shift, he stages this whole thing by driving a van that's like show dogs. He has her rear end him, and then he kidnaps her, takes her to the cabin. But what separates her from everybody else is it just so happens that there's another production going into status at this point where the awesome combination of the two people that are the special effects people that are on the island. Because the one thing about Stanley is that, again, he's known on the island. So you have these two people that are special effects artists that work on the island. They know Stanley because they've done his productions. So they're testing out these new underwater cameras just at the point where Stanley takes Mallory to drown her. And she sinks down right to where these guys are shooting. So they save her. So she's the one that gets rescued. And they're like, fuck, if he's going to come back, then we can make a mold of Mallory that adds to his garden of flesh that will convince him that it's her and dead, and he'll think that he's gotten away with this and we can catch him. So you have that aspect of the mystery that, she doesn't know who he is. She doesn't know his name. She remembers his face, but then you have them fall into her grasp to where she can replicate this body. They can put it in the garden of flesh, so now they can have an idea. They put a camera in the dummy. I just love that the way this movie plays out. It is stupid, but it's entertaining in my opinion.
Yeah, like I said, it's not necessarily a bad movie. It's just I don't know why it took me so long to get through it. I don't know. It's so hard to articulate what I didn't like about this because all the parts there for it to be successful are there. I mean, I'm not expecting, acting from a Martin Scorsese movie, nor am I expecting the budget of Avatar. I got something that felt like an above average episode of a CBS show. Honestly, Cabin by the Lake feels like it would be the perfect season finale for a Criminal Minds episode or something.
Yeah,
It feels
you keep bringing that up, and I absolutely agree with you. Where I distinct the two is Criminal Minds feels like a TV show. This feels like a TV movie of that era.
Yeah, and that's a good thing because, like you said, this feels like the perfect time capsule of that time because I feel like you couldn't get away with making a movie like this today and have it be an exclusive to a streaming service. This feels like it would become an episode of something, but the budget would be reduced. Here, you're getting a big name, and to get someone like Judd Nelson, yeah, he's not the same draw as he was in the late 80s or whatever. That's fine. He's made his money. He can do what he wants. So something must have attracted this to him other than just a payday. And it's nice for him to play something that's out of character.
Absolutely.
He gets to play a bad guy. That's cool. Plus, I got introduced to a bunch of new actors and actresses that I never heard of before. And the fact that Hetty Burris, like I said, that's the voice from Final Fantasy X. That's Yuna. That's really cool. And I have not seen a lot of Judd Nelson movies. Like I said, the thing I know mostly from is Breakfast Club and Transformers. So this is neat to see him in something else.
Yeah, to give you perspective on Nelson's career. So John Bender for the Breakfast Club happens in 1985. John Hughes uses him again the same year in St. Elmo's Fire as Alec Newberry. Blue City, the movie that I mentioned, 1986, so 1 year later. He does the Transformers movie in 1986 as well. From the Hip, which is a lawyer comedy-esque drama that he does in 87. Where I single him out is this film in particular, 1989's Relentless, which is William Lustig, our buddy that did the Maniac Cop series. He did this series called Relentless, which has 4 movies. Enrique and I, unfortunately, had the displeasure of deciding to do one of our Easter marathons of doing all 4 Relentless movies, and I can honestly say these movies get worse as they go. So Relentless series in 1989 starts with Leo Rossi and Judd Nelson, directed by Lustig, and Nelson plays a serial killer in it. He picks people out from the phone book, calls them and says, "I'm going to kill you," and then he goes and does it. So Leo Rossi, who is known more so in the Halloween 2, he's Bud, the Bud, the ambulance guy in Halloween 2. That's Leo Rossi. So he's in this. Judd Nelson is in this. Robert Loggia is in this. Meg Foster is in this. 1989 Relentless. Not a great movie, but solid performance by Cinetel. Solid production by Cinetel Films. Solid production overall, and not a bad little, late 80s thriller where Judd Nelson plays a serial killer. So you have his initial breakout in that point of him being the serial killer. As we go further into it, he's a cop in New Jack City in 91. He plays a character in a Tales from the Crypt episode in 92. Conflict of Interest, he's another cop movie. So he does a lot of productions through the 90s, like Airheads, he plays the record manager, and continues through that. I mean, he's in Steel, for Christ's sake, in 97. Yes,
Wait.
Shaquille O'Neal Steel. He's Nathaniel Burke.
Wow. See, that's a movie I really want to see, all the 90s superhero movies. Steel is one that I, quote unquote, unfortunately missed, but I remember it being at my local Cineplex.
Yeah. So Steel, 97. Then Cabin by the Lake is 2000. After that, he even goes on to do more productions that I'm not even familiar with. I mean, shit, he's in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back in 2001. So
Yep.
Judd Nelson was always that character where he was a working actor. He would take what he could get. He would work. He would continuously go to these productions. That's why the man's resume is literally 126 credits long. So by 2000, he's done Relentless. He's done Steel. He's definitely a known name, but he's not a, Hollywood starlet, I guess we should say at that point. So for him to fall into a TV movie makes complete sense and works because he is a good actor, for one, but also he can play both a good and bad side. And people know him, I would say majority know him as John Bender in The Breakfast Club because that is a claim to fame title. So the fact of him playing a serial killer makes total sense.
Yeah, I like everything I've seen him in. I just decided to look on Wikipedia while we're recording here. I'm surprised how versatile his voice work is.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
He came back to play Bender in Family Guy. He also came back to reprise the role of Rodimus Prime in Transformers Animated, which is a show I'm really going to have to give a second watch to, even though I hate Sorry. But it's impressive when a working actor just does what they want. And I always appreciate actors that don't get this overinflated sense of ego. They're like, I'm going to go where the work is. It's not just, well, I need a car payment. Like there's a guy up here in Canada who I don't want to name because he's very litigious, but he would randomly bring people like James Caan and other people into his movies because I needed a paycheck sort of thing. And they went on record saying that. And whereas Judd Nelson, I feel like he's like, you know what? This looks interesting. This looks like fun. I'm going to go do it. That's cool. I appreciate that type of an actor. And I think when you can make a television movie at the time, this is my thought process. They were hurting for content, so they would take pitches, and I could see a lot of screenwriters just getting their ideas and getting their starts as TV movies. Like that's a fascinating way to get into the industry that just doesn't exist anymore. Now it's all, can you sell it to a streaming service? Can you sell it to Netflix? Can you do this, that, and the other thing? It's an era of movies that's just gone.
And I think to understand TV movies in this era specifically, we didn't have DVRs. We didn't have on demand. This was specifically a time still of pay-per-view and going to the store and renting stuff, which is why, Cabin by the Lake did get put on VHS along with Return and DVD. But going back to the perspective of TV movies, they were a big deal. People would set their schedules around these because, they were movies that you could see in your home without going to the theater and see. And they were big time productions. Even if they were low budget, they were still productions. So the fact that you have Judd Nelson playing Stanley Caldwell, a screenwriter turned serial killer. Oh, well, shit, I'll turn into that for 2 hours on a Friday night. Well, why not? So the story in and of itself of, him being a screenwriter that's trying to complete his script by literally drowning these women, anybody that was watching Lifetime or 60 Minutes or 48 Hours Later at this point would turn in for this movie, which is where its acclaim comes from in regards to the replays it got on USA, Lifetime, Sci-Fi Network. I mean, these are just 3 networks in the US that I can think of that they showed on. There may have been absolutely more. Return to Cabin by the Lake is a true testament to how much power that these movies held. We'll get there, but Cabin by the Lake has a lot to like about it, in my opinion. And I know one that you and I are going to get into right now is the fact that you said that you feel like he's kind of an autopilot. I think that plays into his character because
I can see that.
While he is a serial killer, he is 100% just being the Stanley Caldwell character that's just like, I only know this, so I have to do this. We don't get any background into Stanley Caldwell. We don't get a background into his life. We don't get a background into his family. We meet Stanley Caldwell as somebody that is an established screenwriter on the island that people know, because the introduction we get to his character of everybody knowing him is our cop, played by Michael Weatherly, goes to a screening that is at the effects house of the 2 people that have the movie studio on the island, and they're literally just watching a movie and talking about the fact that Stanley wrote the screenplay, which gives into the idea that he's killed before, but he's doing a new method of it. And natural, like a writer, he has writer's block, so he doesn't know what to do. So when his agent is like, drown the girl, he's like, all right, I'll drown the girl. So then he literally goes and drowns the girl, which, to get into the establishing of how he does this, he takes them out to the lake, he ties an anchor to them, he pushes them over, then pushes the anchor over, sinking them to the bottom. But one of the ones that he does specifically, after his agent is like, drown the girl, he picks her up by the hair, pulls her out by the water, looks at her eyes, and then drops her back down. That is so fucking chilling. Not to mention the point before this, where he tells her, I'm going to take you to a hospital. You want to have clean clothes on. And the next scene, before that, he's smelling an orange. And then the next scene, the woman's gagged with the orange as he's dragging her to the dock, dressed in what I can only describe as almost like a Snow White-esque outfit. Because that's the one thing with the Garden of Flesh, is that he decorates their bodies. This is his display. This is not necessarily for the script. This is for him. He dresses up these bodies. He makes them look pretty, and then he also swims down and tends to them. He tends and gardens his garden of flesh. That's really fucked up, and something I haven't seen before in any other movie.
Yeah, like the idea, like I said, it's really fascinating, and I'm kind of surprised no one has done it before, and I'm kind of surprised no one has done it since. Or if they have, please, guys, let us know. Feedback at ThisWeekInGeek.net. Like I said, the idea, it seems too good to not rip off. And that's, I think, the genius of this. It's such a simple idea, but it's such a creepy idea. And like I said, I keep bringing up, how has this not been ripped off by some CBS show? I'm honestly surprised.
I'm sure it has. I'm sure it has. That's what drives me crazy about Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake is, specifically, not to call you out, but I had to send you these movies. While they are available on YouTube, I luckily have a rip of these movies because the DVD has gone up $70 to $90 because it was put out by the company that does USA releasing. Oh yeah, this is not an easy one to find. That's one of the reasons I wanted to cover it, is because it's available on YouTube in the US as of this recording. Both part 1 and part 2 are available to watch, but to find these streaming, good fucking luck. And that's what drives me crazy is these movies get lost in the abyss. TV movies specifically, especially, get lost in the abyss. The old Lifetime movies that I would watch in the early 2000s, late 90s, I can find bits and pieces of them, but finding the whole part, I either have to luck into somebody having a rip of them or the magical fact that maybe they get dropped on Prime at some point. TV movies are really hard to come by of this level.
Yeah, like it's interesting because I've had this conversation with other people. Like I know I talked with David Weiner, is the director behind the In Search of Darkness documentary.
Yeah.
And we were talking about video preservation and physical media, how it needs to exist.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things I remember about that conversation is sometimes rights get lost or there's just not a demand for certain things. But it should always be available in some capacity. Like one great example right now is I'm surprised how long it's taken for the Extreme Ghostbusters
to become
cartoon.
Available. Yeah.
And that show ended in like the early 2000s to 1999. Here we are in 2024. It's finally getting a release. And yet I can go down and get, like Thundercats. I don't think relatively easy, but it's weird to see how shows like, honestly, as long as somebody holds the license, there should be an option for print on demand. If you're willing to pay for it, whatever. Like I know you and Enrique would often lament how Freddy's Nightmares is not available legally anymore, at least in even in North America. I know you can buy older versions that are Australia or British versions, but not in North America. And I it blows my mind. Like if there's people who want this movie, as long as I'm sure there's probably something in these contracts written after so many years you no longer receive royalties, or the royalties would be so low as to who gives a shit. Like I can't imagine more than a couple of thousand people, and I'm probably highly estimating that number, wanting the 2 Cabin by the Lake movies. So why not partner with some print on demand company? Like hell, go talk to Mill Creek. And say, hey, if somebody wants these, just print them, give them the most bare bones packaging and artwork, but make them available in the highest possible quality. I'm not saying you need a 4K scan of the original thing, because that likely doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah.
But why the hell not? And
well, it comes to the fact that ownership, unfortunately, in regards to music rights and rights of the beholder is an absolute, pardon my French, but a motherfucker and a half. That's why most contracts today, especially with soundtracks in regards to the mind of it, include all future media to be invented. That is 100% what contracts say now when it comes to soundtrack basing, because a perfect example is the film Trick or Treat from the 80s with Gene Simmons and Ozzy Osbourne, Sammy Kerr, the rock star. That movie has been so unavailable for a long time because of the rights in regards to Fastway's soundtrack. Luckily, companies like Synapse, that is currently working on a 4K that's going to be released, that I believe is available on Screenbox right now in regards to the 4K print, is made available to us again. With these kind of productions, it's hard to tell A, who owns it, B, where it can be found, and C, if they can actually find the elements to put out a standard definition copy, an HD copy. It's hard to tell until you get into the delving of those legalities of where these availability of these products will be and these titles will be. So when it comes to something like Cabin by the Lake, there was a DVD in the mid 2000s that came out that was available, that is now, absolutely out of print, and nothing in regards of availability on streaming or physical media has been released since. So the fact that these 2 movies are available on YouTube right now makes me super happy, but also makes me super sad, because it's like, man, I love these movies and I know others would, And I know others probably remember them too, so why aren't they available? It goes back to the whole thing of physical media. While it is a boutique thing and a dying thing, film preservation is super, super important. Just
You know
like,
what?
Yeah, go ahead.
Somebody said this to me this week, and I can't, it has not left my head, Dave. It's been living in my head rent-free for about a week now. Physical media is the new vinyl.
Yeah.
And it got me terrified thinking about, like, because I used to have a collection.
I would go and say it's the new CD because vinyl is still readily available in shit like Walmart and Meijer and stuff you can get vinyl at. CDs, cassette tapes, all that is obsolete at this point.
Like, I remember, like, I used to have, at the height of my collection, I had 3,000 DVDs. Mm-hmm. And I started selling them off and giving them away. And now I only collect Marvel stuff, which I've kind of stopped doing that because I haven't been impressed with a lot of the turnout recently.
Yeah.
And I keep the things I get sent for review. And for example, I'm looking at my Star Treks and I'm thinking, I have so many different versions of that, but what has the right special features? Does one have the right audio mix? But I think of something I've been waiting for forever. Is there ever going to be, because I know we got the 4K of Alien a couple years ago. Are we ever going to get the 4K of Aliens? There's talk.
Oh, you don't know?
Yeah. It's supposed to happen soon.
March. March. So I literally have True Lies sitting in my Vudu right now, 4K transfer, because Aliens, True Lies, and The Abyss finally became available because they're getting released in March on 4K.
I am so going to pre-order that the second we're off this call.
I totally get it.
But yeah, it's like, it's so strange to think that movies can be lost to time because it costs nothing, in my opinion, to like just make them available. I said, do it print on demand, do it streaming. If you're willing to stream the millionth fucking animated Garfield movie or something, just throw this on there. Why not? I mean, Amazon Prime has some really weird shit in their movie catalog, which I don't know how it ends up there, or throw it up on Tubi. I'm sure Enrique would have some insights into that.
Absolutely would. Yeah.
Like, there's just so much stuff I'm surprised just gets lost. And Cabin by the Lake, I think it's worth seeing. Definitely once. Like I said,
I think,
for sure.
I think it's important to point out the fact that you have Judd Nelson giving a performance that is the epitome of a psychopath, but also the kindly psychopath, which is the scariest of them. Because once he kidnaps Mallory, in his van, he has, "I'm the guy your mother warned you about." And then when Mallory gets, taken by the sheriff and the special effects people, Duncan and Laurie, which I love those characters. And, she's rescued and they do the dummy of her. They do the cast of her and they put her in the water. And then Nelson pulls the camera out the eye, revealing that, oh God, this is a dummy. This isn't the real body. So then he goes and abducts her again. And literally when she gets in the van, he has taken the effort to put in a little fucking mark that says, "I'm still the guy your mother warned you about."
That's something I've got to mention.
Yeah.
These movies are weirdly funny at times.
Yeah. No, they absolutely are, because his stature as a psychopath is exactly what you expect as a psychopath. But he has the humor, which we'll get us into more as we get into Return of the Cabin by the Lake here in a second. But Cabin by the Lake is that essential piece of early 2000s TV movie that is the lifetime aspect of a serial killer, but also has a great story into it, wrapped around the concept of you have a guy that's killing people on this island, in LA. Like, this is Los Angeles. Like, if we failed to mention that, this is Los Angeles. Like, he is in LA on a lakeside and drowning these women, and there's missing people that the sheriff's department's reporting about and whatnot. So once they find the Garden of Flesh, there's all their missing victims. So the guy that they least suspected was right there the entire time. So when he captures both his agent and the director, that is annoying as shit this entire movie. Is it fucking Nathan or something like that? I can't remember.
Something like that, yeah.
Logan is literally the most despicable character in this movie, and he's not even killing anybody. He's just annoying.
He's just Hollywood. For lack
he's just
of
Hollywood.
a better phrase.
Yeah. So then when you had the final confrontation where, he's kidnapped Mallory and kidnapped Reagan, his agent, he's taken them to the Garden of Flesh. He's put a cleaver into Logan. So the cops raid the house and they're, where's Stanley? And he's like, he's going to the lake. So they go to his boat, they track him, and right as he's drowning Lauren, she pulls him in. So he's wrapped up in the rope with her. They rescue her. Stanley's still at the bottom. And, you said the thing about the soundtrack. Deliver Me, the main song that they use in this, because the one thing that they pinpoint in this movie is Stanley's obsession with water. Water plays a big part in this movie because it is the concept of drowning. It's the concept of being put to the bottom of the lake. How long can you hold your breath? How long does the fear encompass you before you hit the bottom? So that's a big part of this movie. So once Deliver Me kicks in, I can't remember who the artist is, but once that song kicks in and Mallory's being pulled to the surface and Stanley's at the bottom, watching her go to the top, and you just see him like, oh my God, like my final girl is happening right now. It's so insanely beautiful the way that it's presented to you, where you feel sympathy for him, but you're also just like, nah, motherfucker, you've drowned 6 women. And I've seen at least 2 of them happen in front of me. So, nah, this isn't the sympathy you get. So when his body isn't found at the end, which leads into the return of Cabin by the Lake, you're sucked into this story, and you're just like, oh man, I want more. So the fact that we got a fucking sequel to a TV movie, which wasn't necessarily
Rarely
common.
happens.
Yeah, wasn't necessarily common, but could happen. Holy shit. I mean, that is absolutely why I have appreciation for this double feature, because this is a time that we have no recollection of. Like, I cannot remember a Netflix original movie getting a sequel. Like, if you can name one, I'm happily to hear it, but I cannot remember a time where a direct property.
Bodyguard maybe got a sequel.
No, that was theatrical. That was a theatrical movie because Henrik and I saw that in theaters. Enrique and I saw that in theaters. And Hitman's Bodyguard, Hitman's Wife Bodyguard or something like that.
Maybe that's what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Yeah. But no, in regards to like a direct, takeoff from a TV production or a streaming production now, it's not very common.
Yeah, it's rare. So, like I said, if you want to watch this particular flick, you can just have to search it out on YouTube. It is not particularly hard to find, and it's worth watching through at least once. We'll say that. So,
well, because the ending, so the ending of Cabin by the Lake, Stanley, they raid the water, and they're like, we haven't found Stanley. So then we cut to Stanley, who is talking to another agent, which, she is so stupid for one, but he's talking to another agent, and he's like, I've got a new idea where he buries women alive he judges by their hands, and he takes their hands, and he's of course got a fake beard on at this point, because the one thing in this series,
looks fucking ridiculous.
The one thing in this series is people are real stupid to not recognize Stanley Caldwell, especially when we get in the second movie here in just a second. So he's like, he judges by their hands, and he takes their hands, and that he's just like not gonna stop. Like, he's moving on to the next victim. That's what they set the movie up as. That's how Cabin by the Lake ends, and you're thinking, okay, well, that's the Adventures of Stanley Caldwell. Except in 2001, they did a sequel. A year later, Return to Cabin by the Lake, directed by the same guy, written by the same guy. So Po Chi Long is doing the directing. Writer David Stevens is back, but he also has Jeffrey Reddick at this point. And I have a deep appreciation for this movie because of how absolutely insane it is, borrowing from the first movie.
Yeah, the sequel is one. I think I like the first one better, because I think the second one is not as well paced, but the second one is infinitely funnier. Which, whoever wrote it, I think they definitely leaned into the meta humor, and I really dug that.
So, insight into that meta humor, would you like to know the major franchise that Jeffrey Reddick is associated with?
Yes.
Final Destination.
Oh, okay.
How much does that make sense now when you watch that movie, that you're just like, oh, no, this is a guy that totally knows how to kill people random ways?
Yeah, like, there's a lot to like about Return to Cabin by the Lake. I'd say it's arguably the more fun one, whereas
absolutely.
whereas the first one's a lot more serious.
So,
but the stupid factor is cranked to 11 when
no,
this
it
is like it's so weird. Like this is Stanley Caldwell. How do you not recognize this guy? His picture surely must have been like a newspaper at least once.
Well, and I think to go back to Cabin by the Lake, let's point out the one thing that makes everybody alert to the fact that Stanley's guilty in the first movie is that there are 3 actresses that go to the special effects studio that we mentioned. So one of them is getting cast, and as one of them is getting cast in the molding and everything, the 2 others are talking about the script and bringing back the perspective. The 2 special effects people, Duncan and Lori, the couple that lives on the island that does the special effects for Hollywood movies, are talking to these 2 girls, and they're relating to them exactly what has happened on the island. They're like, oh yeah, this guy that, he drowns people and then gardens their flesh. They're like, well, who wrote the script? And she's like, well, I don't know, but and keeps going on. And then who wrote the goddamn script? And one of the girls that's getting cast, and she's like, all right, do you have a cell phone? So then when she says Stanley Caldwell, they're like, oh, well, fuck, we all got to go. So they leave this girl getting casted. So then in the second movie, despite everything that's wrong about this, they're doing a movie on the murders of Stanley Caldwell.
Yeah, there's a lot to like about the storylines about this. Like I said, it's one of those things, like I said, I'm so surprised someone has not attempted to remake this. And the fact that Judd Nelson is still an active working actor.
Yeah.
If you wanted to make a threequel, you could easily turn this into a trilogy.
No, you absolutely could, especially with the ending of this one.
Yeah, the door is left wide open, and I think that's what I kind of appreciate about these movies. He gets away by the skin of his teeth every single time,
but at the same time, the opening of this movie, does he not have the worst hairpiece you've ever seen?
Oh my god, that fucking beard! Like, what the hell are you doing? I mean, it's a lot more convincing than his Colonel Sanders look. But yeah, it's so strange. And I'm thinking, we'll talk about this when we've gone through this movie, but setting up a fictional third one, I think I know how that one might go. Especially in the era of streaming and AI and everything. I could see something happening with this. It's just, is Peacock or Hulu going to pick up the phone when we come calling? Man, you're friends with Enrique. Have him pitch the shit to Tubi. I guarantee you there would be a conversation.
He actually really enjoys the Cabin by the Lake films, because that was one of the things where I was like, oh man, this guy's my friend, because we started talking about it at one point early in our friendship, and I was like, holy shit, you've seen them? Because, just like you, I have to introduce these movies to people for the most part. Very rarely do I find somebody that actually remembers Cabin by the Lake. But going back to this hairpiece, he's got long locks down to his shoulders and this little goatee going on. And the movie opens with him having this agent on this boat that is talking about whatever work he's doing at this point. And she talks about the fact that, I think we can make this work. Meanwhile, on the TV or the radio that he has on the boat, they talk about the production of Cabin by the Lake. His agent immediately starts insulting the writings of Stanley Caldwell, not realizing that she's on a fucking boat with him out in the middle of the water. So once he realizes that his production is going forward, he's like, well, I don't need you anymore. So he starts wrapping this plant around his agent and sinking her to the bottom of the water.
Oh,
which isn't funny.
Lady, how do you not see this coming?
Yeah, it's like, that's Stanley Caldwell in front of you. That's the one thing you have to suspend disbelief. You have to suspend disbelief on this movie, because, my God, how can no one see that Stanley Caldwell is right in front of them the entire time? So the setting of Cabin by the Lake, that set up the murders that Stanley Caldwell committed. Return to Cabin by the Lake in 2001. A movie is being made about the crimes of Cabin by the Lake, and Stanley, Judd Nelson, infiltrates the set, becomes the director, which we'll get to, and completely starts mastering his murders over and over again. And I rewatching this, I was like, this movie is the epitome of a TV movie sequel.
Yeah, like 100%. And the fact that it takes you through the weird, bizarre world of Holly Weird,
Yeah.
I think works a lot in its favor. I think in a lot of ways, the second movie is a lot smarter in how it's written. It's not as suspenseful or engaging. It's more of that meta horror humor that was very prevalent at the basically the post Scream era.
Yeah.
But yeah, like ultimately the second one, like I said, I like elements of it more than the first. I definitely like Judd Nelson way more in this one because he's way more animated. He's way more involved.
You root for him. You almost root for him because at this point he's knocking off people that you also dislike. Because what I love about the presentation of Return to Cabin by the Lake is it does not think positively of Hollywood at all. It brings into account the people behind it. It brings into account the people that have felt the real events of it. You have the brother that's one of the survivors of his sister that was drowned by Caldwell that plays a big role in this. This movie does not take lightly how Hollywood treats true crimes. And that's honestly one of the things I absolutely love about it.
Which, you know what? Speaking about true crime and people kind of exploiting that, obviously you and I are both podcasters. I've been podcasting since 2007, and actually, depending on when this episode airs, Twig is 17 years old.
Wow. Congrats.
And thank you. And I've heard people talk about true crime podcasters. They get a lot of hate and a lot of bullshit thrown their way because I feel like they're exploiting the families because, you know, it's something terrible has happened to them and someone's exploiting them for whatever. And I don't think all true crime podcasters do that. And they kind of talk about that in this movie for a second because the brother of one of the murdered people from the beginning of the movie is like, don't make a movie about my murdered sister.
Yeah.
Like, and I'm like, and that's kind of interesting foreshadowing to what happens today because there's a lot of true crime podcasts and YouTube channels out there, and some of them get a lot of hate for it. And sometimes some of those YouTube channels, they'll contact the victims' families and they'll say, hey, are you cool with this? Here's all my information. Do you have anything to add? If you don't want me to do it, I won't. And that's how you respectfully take on a story. But sometimes Hollywood don't care.
Yeah.
Like sometimes it's just if a story's in the public, if it's ever been written about in a newspaper, it's public record, right? And I could see in the fictional world of Cabin by the Lake, well, Stanley had his garden of flesh. That's an interesting idea. Well, he's dead. I guess I can do it. Here's all the people who were involved. Here's Mallory and here's Boone.
Yeah.
And at one point, Stanley gets the actors playing Boone and Mallory to reenact his final scene. He's like, I'm going to get revenge because they're gone.
And I think that's a very important point of this movie where you realize, oh, fuck, Stanley has all the cards in his hand. So JC, the original director of the movie, claims to have been Stanley's best friend, not knowing that Stanley Caldwell is literally sitting next to him while he says this. So JC, eventually gets knocked off with his with one of the producer's sons too, which is a coke addict. So that
was a hilarious scene, by the way.
Well, the coke addict is literally doing coke in the back of the car. He gets picked up by Stanley, who infiltrates the driver and takes the car, picks him up. Then he is getting ready to drop him overboard. He takes him overboard. He gets the reins of him untied. So he's like, fuck you, dude. I'm going to get free. So then Stanley runs him down with a boat. So that's our second murder in the movie, aside from the agent that he kills in the beginning when he finds out the production's going ahead. So then JC, the director, is a piece of shit who lies the entire time about being Stanley's best friend and wants to do this production with respect and everything. Meanwhile, he lights firecrackers on sets to get everybody's attention. So that when Stanley gets a hold of him, he's like, all right, I'm taking over this production. And if you have any problem about that, I'm going to light a firecracker under your ass, which is one of JC's, common phrases he used to get people going. So when he sticks a firecracker under his ass and lights it, he's like, all right, you want to take the medicine to knock you out or you want to do this? So then when he comes to, he's been buried alive and Stanley is right above his grave lighting off fireworks. So there is an absolute humor with the deaths in this movie. But going back to what you said about the reveal of the production, they reveal this underwater set of the Garden of Flesh that Stanley is a production assistant as he sneaks onto the set and infiltrates, and then goes about going to the way that Stanley would garden his Garden of Flesh. And they're like, I didn't give you any direction. Like, how'd you know that? And he's like, I just assumed. So he woos Dahlia Salem, who plays Allison in this, who is a true crime, aficionado who has read Stanley Caldwell's screenplay, loves Stanley Caldwell's screenplay, and understands the emotion. So then you have Judd Nelson, Stanley Caldwell, attach onto a love interest that he cannot have. Like, he absolutely cannot have in this movie, because Allison is going to be your final girl. She's going to rise up and take everything over. This movie is insane in regards to how it goes about him knocking off the people to take over the production, not to mention the fact he actually directs a successful movie.
Yeah, like it's got a lot of parts for it that kind of work. And like I said, I wish I had the same love for it that you do, but I can see why you love it. And I think that's fascinating that you can have a movie like this that I feel is relatively unknown.
Yeah.
But
absolutely.
Television movie did well enough to get a sequel. It got printed on DVD for whatever that's worth. And the market for, I'm actually just going to look on eBay right now. I'm curious to know how much one of these goes for. So fill some air for about 30 seconds.
I would say it's at least anywhere between $50 to $70, because that's usually what I find it at. There may be one on there for 25 or so, but Cabin by the Lake was released on DVD around, like I said, the mid 2000s, I want to say. Double feature of Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake. As far as it goes for availability, beside YouTube, that is the only way you can get this movie. So once this hits streaming, if ever, I'll be very happy. But until then, it is literally lost in obscurity via YouTube, or if you find a bootleg or the actual physical copy of it. But Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake are time capsules of a time where TV movies were a big deal. People would record them on VHS, would set their schedules around them, and generally had a lot of syndication on, networks like Lifetime and Sci-Fi. But there are also points where the entertainment that was presented in these films are the Lifetime movies that we've come to know and love. You have a killer, you have a simple story, and you have, something that has to stop the killer or prevent it from going further. Return to Cabin by the Lake ends with a beautiful, beautiful climax where Allison, who is the lover of Stanley Caldwell in his writings and everything, has been working with Stanley, unbeknownst that it is Stanley, and they have this final shoot where they're going to do this shooting of the Garden of Flesh, which, to bring back up, one of the survivors' brothers gets involved with the story at one point to where he's, he is protesting the film, doesn't want anything to do with it. He ends up getting involved in a point to where he gets blamed for a crime when a light that is malfunctioned by Stanley drops into the water and electrocutes one of the divers. So he's blamed for it. The movie takes a climax to where they do this final shoot to where Stanley is basically going to kill the two leads on the film. Allison sees what's going on, breaks the glass. They get free. Stanley's unveiled now as being Stanley Caldwell. So he runs off. They somehow end up at his original cabin. He gets electrocuted. She thinks he's dead. Everything's all good. And then the movie ends to where she is with her boyfriend, and he's talking about how the movie's made $36 million in the box office, and she's like, I never want to see it. She slowly sees her boyfriend transition to Stanley. It's revealed to be a nightmare. It's revealed she's never seen the movie, has no intention to. Then we cut to Stanley, who's reading a newspaper, sees the movie as a big hit, and then he walks towards the ocean wherever he is and slowly disappears. And that's the end of Return to Cabin by the Lake. So basically, you have a serial killer that infiltrates his own production of his movie and takes over directing, makes a successful movie, and then fucks off into the water, and that's the end of the series.
Honestly, I could see this continuing. And as we begin to close out the show here, let's pitch a fictional third movie. I could see, because this is the era of pitching to streaming networks, obviously Stanley has assumed a new identity. He's been not quiet in the intervening years, but he's committed a series of murders, and someone is starting to put together the things again. And maybe it's a true crime podcast, or so maybe a podcast network.
I think a podcast is a solid setting.
Yeah, and I could see someone doing like a podcast, like, hey guys, we're on YouTube, or whatever their version of it will be, and Stanley starts to infiltrate him as a expert who knows this, and then members of the podcast staff start getting knocked off one by one. And then maybe if you want to have it be really interesting, you bring back Boone and Mallory, because I know both actors are still working.
Yeah.
Bring them back to take him down for the final time, because maybe one of these podcast people contacted Boone and Mallory, and Stanley gets the idea, oh, my old the ones who got away are still alive and they haven't seen me in like 30 years. Maybe now I can get my true final scene.
I think
and
that's
I could
solid.
see that working. Yeah,
Yeah,
like
no, I
that'd be
absolutely
how
do.
I'd pitch it.
So
about yours?
Dahlia Salem, just to back up real quick. So her screen debut in regards to like a TV movie was Return to Cabin by the Lake. To give you the satisfaction of your Criminal Minds, CSI in 2003, JAG 2003, House 2006, CSI Miami 2006, Criminal Minds 2006. So people from the series went on to go on shows like that. So with that in mind, my pitch for, let's call it, let me think here for a second. So you got Cabin by the Lake, Return to Cabin by the Lake. I don't even know what the title would be, but
I'm trying
I
to
would
think something.
go. Oh man, yeah, it's hard to tell. I would think
Visitation to the lake.
I don't know about that, but
Requiem by the lake. We shall workshop it.
Turtles in Time by the Lake, Season of the
Yes.
Witch by the Lake. I
Turtles
can
in
get this
Time
going
by
all
the
day.
Lake.
But no, I think if you were to do a sequel to Return to Cabin by the Lake with Caldwell still visible in the aspect of the story, it would have to be something with either a podcast or it would have to be something in regards to a book, even maybe. I don't know. But Stanley Caldwell is loose by the end of Return to the Cabin by the Lake. He wanders in the ocean. That's the end we see of him. I think for him to return, it would have to be something along the lines of somebody trying to interconnect the events of Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake to a point where Caldwell is thought to be dead. So then you have somebody that starts bringing forward, hey, I'm a big fan of the show. I thought you might be interested in these facts. I was best friends with Stanley, just like he does with Return. Caldwell is very charismatic. He's very formal, and he's very upfront with people that appreciate him. So if anything, you would probably be best suited to get a YouTuber or reviewer of somebody that is giving an analysis of Cabin by the Lake in the genius of Stanley Caldwell. And then Caldwell comes up to them and he's just like, hey, I appreciate your content. I think you got some great insight. Would you be interested in doing, a sequel to Cabin by the Lake? I think you would have to expand on the crimes by going back to the original content. So Cabin by the Lake sets up Return. So then the sequel to Return would have to be relating back to the events of Cabin. So if anything, you would have to do a survivor story of almost Mallory from the first one, which is very topical because I Spit on Your Grave 3 was the events based on the person that was in the character of the original remake of I Spit on Your Grave, going back and setting the wrong things right. So you could either have a final girl aspect, or you could have Stanley going back to what he knows, or you could intertwine the two.
Yeah, I think the idea is relatively solid, and I would love to just bend Judd Nelson's ear for just 5 minutes and say, hey, what do you think? And just to see, I'm gonna say, dude, I'm a friggin' internet nobody.
Yeah.
But what do you think, Mr. Nelson? I'd be very curious to see what he would say.
I've heard he's a very formal and generally nice guy. So if it came to the point that I actually had contacted him, I would absolutely reach out. I'm curious. Was a third movie ever pitched? And if so, what was it? So I'd be curious to see. But in conclusion, Cabin by the Lake and Return to Cabin by the Lake are movies that I hold dear to myself, not just for the fact that my mother introduced me to them, who is one of my best role models to this day, but also they are the point of cinematic history where TV wasn't something that you picked up on the internet. You had to have the cable to watch the USA premiere of these films or catch them on a rerun of Lifetime or Sci-Fi. These are movies that have become forgotten because their availability is absolutely nil right now. And that's a tragedy to me because I feel like there is an audience out for these, especially now, like you said, with the true crime broom. Even though these aren't true crime, these are movies that take it on a basis and then elevate it on the sequel of being that, level of true crime that is podcasting and YouTube and TikTok now.
Yeah, now I've done a little bit of research while we were talking. To find these movies, they're not as expensive as I was expecting. You can pay anywhere from between $6 to $7 Canadian to all the way up to $100, but only one of them is $100, and it's because it's a very specific cover is worth that. So
Okay.
If you look on eBay, you can find these if you wish to own these physically. There are versions that are region free. So if you happen to live in region 4 or in the UK, you can get these pretty easily. As for the North American release, I wonder if that's the one that's really expensive because it has the blue cover. The red cover seems to be a lot more common, but definitely something you guys should definitely check out. Like I said, if you don't want to necessarily pay for these things, you can watch it for free on YouTube. Like I said, they are not hard to find. I think they're worth a watch through once. And definitely through this conversation, I've gained a bit of an appreciation for them. And should I get a chance to talk to Rodimus Prime himself, I'm going to ask. So the next time here on Twig, me and Dave are probably going to be talking either the Critters movies or we're going to be talking about the Creepshow movies, one or the others. But I know me, Alex, and Aaron are going to be getting back together for some stuff later on. I know me and Ken have some stuff planned for more of the anime stuff that him and Alex want to show me. So it's going to be a good year of content for Twig as we go into 2024. Our baby is 17 years old. It's old enough to drive. It's old enough to date. Maybe it's kissed a girl by now or a boy. Who knows? It's 2024. Who am I to judge? So anyway, for ThisWeekInGeek.net and pretty much anything you listen to us on, we have been
Do You Even Movies, David Denoyer.
And I've been Mike the Birdman saying, be kind, rewind.
Are either one of these any good? Sir,
What?
are either one of these any good?
I don't watch movies.
Quick, change the channel.
You're wasting your life making shit! Nobody cares! These movies are terrible!
You're still here? It's over. Go home. Go.